She had $400 million at 9 o'clock. By midnight, she had nothing. Ava Whitmore built her empire from a studio apartment and a laptop she bought on layaway. She survived 17-hour days, predatory investors, and a market that never wanted to believe a woman in her 20s could run a billion-dollar company. She survived all of it. And then, on the coldest night Chicago had seen in 11 years, the people she trusted most took everything she had built and set it on fire, while she was still standing inside. If you've ever watched someone destroy something you loved, you know what the next few hours felt like for her. Hit like if this story already has your attention. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. And stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens between Ava Whitmore and the janitor who catches her when she falls is going to stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The snow started at 6 in the evening, which was the first thing that went wrong. By the time the emergency board meeting was called at 7:30, Michigan Avenue was already buried under 4 inches and accumulating fast. By the time Ava Whitmore walked into the 43rd floor conference room of Whitmore Capital's Chicago headquarters at 8:04, the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows looked like it had been erased. Just white, just blinding, indifferent white in every direction, and the kind of wind that hit the glass in long, sustained howls, like something trying to get in. She noticed the snow because it was the last ordinary thing she had. The conference room held 14 people. She knew all of their faces. She had hired 7 of them personally, had eaten dinner at the homes of 3, had flown in a private plane with 2 others just 6 weeks ago when they closed the Meridian acquisition. 14 people she had spent years building relationships with, and not one of them looked at her when she walked through the door. That was when she knew, not suspected. Knew. Ava. It was Martin Kessler, her CFO, who spoke first. Martin, who had been with her since year 2, who kept a framed photo of the 2 of them at the NASDAQ closing bell on his office wall. He was sitting at the far end of the table with a folder in front of him, his hands folded on top of it the way a man folds his hands when he has rehearsed whatever comes next. "Please sit down." "I'll stand," she said. He nodded like he'd expected that too. "There's been a development." "Tell me." Someone she didn't recognize. A man in his 50s in a gray suit, someone's lawyer, she understood immediately, cleared his throat and placed a document in front of the empty chair at the head of the table. Her chair. "Miss Whitmore, my name is Douglas Farr. I'm outside counsel representing the board in this matter. I want to be straightforward with you. The SEC has initiated a formal inquiry into Whitmore Capital's trading activity over the past 18 months. Specifically, I know what they're saying." She had seen the initial report 40 minutes ago on her phone in the back of the car on the way over. Unauthorized trades, fabricated approvals, a pattern of transactions that, on paper, looked exactly like someone with executive access had been systematically looting client accounts. "I know what the accusation is. I'm telling you those transactions didn't go through my desk. They didn't go through anyone on my team with authorization to— Ava." Martin again, that same flat, careful voice. "We've seen the documentation." "Then you've seen fabricated documentation." Silence. The particular kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room has already decided something and is just waiting for the person who hasn't been told yet to finish speaking. She looked around the table. Some of them were looking at their phones. One, Derek Paulson, her VP of Investor Relations, a man she had promoted twice, was looking out the window at the snow. "We're moving to suspend your executive authority pending the completion of the inquiry," Douglas Farr said. "The board has voted." The motion passed 11-1. 11-1. She heard herself say it. Who voted against? Nobody answered. Who voted against? "That's not," Farr started. "I built this company," Ava said. Her voice was still level. She was aware of how level it was, the way you're aware of your own breathing when you're trying not to panic. "I started it in a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park when I was 24 years old. I brought every single person in this room into it. I want to know who, out of 14 people, had the decency to vote against freezing out the woman whose name is on the door." "That information is confidential for the time being," Farr said. "Of course it is." Martin finally looked up. For just a second, a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. She couldn't tell if it was regret or relief. Your accounts will be frozen as of midnight tonight, both personal and corporate. Company cards, the expense accounts, my personal accounts. The inquiry encompasses my personal accounts, she said again. Not a question, not outrage, just making sure she had heard it right, making sure the shape of what was happening was exactly as large as it seemed. As a protective measure, Farr said, yes, standard procedure in a matter of this. You need a key card to get back into this building, she said. I assume mine stops working at midnight as well. At the completion of this meeting, actually. She nodded. She picked up the document from the table, the one they had placed in her chair at the head of the table that was hers, in the company she had built from a laptop and a dream in 7 years of her life. And she read it. She read the whole thing. Nobody spoke. She took her time. When she was finished, she set it back down. I'll need an hour, she said, to collect personal items from my office. Of course, Farr said. I don't need your permission, Ava said. I was informing you. Course. Her office was on the same floor, at the corner, with windows on 2 sides. On clear days, you could see the lake from one window and the river from the other. Tonight, there was nothing outside either of them but the storm. She sat at her desk for about 10 minutes without doing anything, just sat there in the dark, which she'd left on because hitting the light switch felt like admitting something. Her computer screen had already gone dark. It moved fast, apparently. The framed magazine covers on the wall, the small awards on the credenza, the photo of her mother at the opening day party, still in the silver frame she'd bought at a CVS because she hadn't had time to find something nicer. All of it was still there, and none of it was hers anymore in any way that mattered. She called her attorney, got voicemail, left a message that she kept short and factual because she knew better than to say more than she had to at a moment like this. She called her sister in Phoenix. That one she didn't leave a message for. She didn't know what she would have said. She packed the photo of her mother, her personal laptop, and a green coffee mug that she'd had since college. Everything else could stay. Everything else was just furniture. On the way out, she stopped at Martin's office. He was still in there, still sitting at his desk with his coat on, and for a moment she thought he might actually say something real, something that wasn't lawyer-filtered or board-approved or carefully designed to create no legal liability. Instead, he said, Ava, I think it's best if You have a picture of us on your wall, she said, from the NASDAQ closing. Do you remember that day? He didn't answer. You cried, she said. You actually cried. I gave you a hard time about it for a month. She paused. I should have given you a hard time about a lot of other things instead. She left. The lobby of the Whitmore Capitol building was 40 feet of gray marble, and at 8:50 on a Wednesday night in a blizzard, it was mostly empty. The security desk near the entrance had one guard on duty, a heavy-set man named Curtis who had worked nights here for as long as Ava could remember, who always had a crossword puzzle going and who called her Miss Whitmore, in a way that sounded like actual respect rather than performance. Tonight, Curtis was busy with something at the far end of the desk, and Ava was 10 feet from the revolving door, already digging in her coat pocket for her phone to call a car, when her heel found a wet patch on the marble. She went down fast, the kind of fall where you don't have time to throw your hands out, where the floor just rises up and meets you all at once. The green mug went skidding. Her bag hit the marble with a crack. She didn't hit the floor. There was a hand on her arm. Both hands, actually, strong enough to stop her momentum before she went all the way down, pulling her back upright with the kind of reflex that doesn't have time to be graceful. She ended up half standing, half leaning, gripping a stranger's forearm with both hands while the world sorted itself back out into the right orientation. Okay, said a voice. I got you. You're okay. She let go of the arm, straightened up, pushed her hair out of her face. The man who had caught her was about her age, early 30s, maybe 32, 33. He was wearing the gray uniform of the building's night cleaning crew, a pair of earbuds around his neck, and an expression that was mostly just checking to make sure she wasn't injured. He was holding a mop handle in one hand and had clearly dropped the bucket to grab her because it was on its side about 4 feet away, spreading soapy water slowly across the wet marble. Sorry about the floor, he said, not apologetically exactly, more like someone reporting a fact. I was going to put the sign out. I hadn't gotten there yet. It's fine, Ava said. I'm fine. You sure? You almost went down pretty hard. I'm sure. She looked around for the mug, found it near the base of the security desk, intact. Thank you. Sure. He went to right the bucket. She picked up the mug, checked it for cracks, and walked to the revolving door. Through the glass she could see the street, which was to say, she couldn't see the street. She could see a wall of white and the suggestion of shapes that might have been cars or might have been parked snowdrifts. The wind was hitting the building hard enough that she could feel it through the glass. She pulled out her phone. No car service was accepting new rides. She tried 3 apps. The fourth gave her an estimated wait time of 92 minutes, which, in a blizzard with no coat that was warm enough for this, was not really an option. She stood there for a moment with her phone in her hand. The train stopped running about 20 minutes ago, said the man behind her. He'd gotten the bucket upright and was wringing out the mop. Heard it on the radio. Wind's knocked some lines down on the red line. Buses are running skeleton service if you can find one, but honestly, in this, he nodded toward the door. You're not going to find one for a while. Ava turned around. You know what's running? Right now? Not much. He squeezed the mop against the wringer and ran it over the wet section of floor. You live close? Lincoln Park. That's 3 miles. You're not walking that tonight. She already knew that. She was just processing the information at a slightly slower rate than usual, because her brain was still trying to handle several other things simultaneously. Is there somewhere in the building? Lobby's warm, he said. You're welcome to wait it out here. Curtis doesn't care. He glanced toward the security desk where Curtis had reappeared with a cup of coffee and what looked like a Sudoku book. Might be a few hours. Ava looked at the storm. She looked at the lobby. She looked at the green mug in her hands. Okay, she said. I'll wait. She sat on one of the marble benches along the wall. Decorative things, not actually designed for sitting, which described a lot of the building's interior, and spent the first 40 minutes trying to reach people. Her attorney called back. She gave him the details, agreed to come in first thing in the morning, hung up. She tried 2 financial contacts who she thought might be able to tell her what was actually happening with the SEC inquiry and got vague, careful responses that told her exactly how quickly word had already spread. She called a friend, a real one, or someone she'd thought of that way, who picked up and then got very quiet and said she'd call back tomorrow. The tomorrow call, Ava understood, would not come. She set the phone face down on the bench beside her and stared at the ceiling. Water? She looked up. The janitor was standing about 6 feet away, holding out a water bottle, the generic kind from the vending machine down the hall. She could see the reflection of the machine's lights in the plastic. Where did you... Machine by the freight elevator. He held it out a little further. You've been on the phone for a while. Figured you might want something. Ava took the water. Thank you. You didn't have to... It's water, he said, like that settled the question of whether he had to. She almost smiled. What's your name? Logan. He shifted the mop to his other hand. Logan Hayes. Ava. He nodded, clearly already knowing who she was, not making a thing of it. You need anything else, just say so. He went back to work. She watched him for a moment, the way he moved through the lobby, methodical and unhurried, the way he checked corners she wouldn't have thought to check, the way he ran the mop along the baseboards with the same attention he gave to the center of the floor. There was something in it that was the opposite of performance. He wasn't doing it for anyone's approval. He was just doing it correctly because that's how he did it. She looked at the phone, back at the storm, back at the water bottle in her hands. What do you listen to? She asked. He looked over. What? The earbuds. When you're working. What do you listen to? A beat. Podcasts, mostly. History stuff, sometimes econ. Economics? Financial history, mostly. Not the current stuff. He kept working. How markets behave when systems fail, that kind of thing. She was quiet for a moment. Do you have a business background? Used to. He said it the way people say things they've made peace with. Not bitter, not defensive, just past tense. Before. She didn't ask before what. Not yet. The storm didn't let up. By 10 o'clock, the temperature outside had dropped another 8 degrees, and the lobby windows were making sounds that marble buildings aren't supposed to make. Curtis had fallen asleep at the security desk, mouth open, crossword abandoned, Sudoku face down beside his elbow. Somewhere around 10:15, Logan pulled one of the folding chairs from the small anteroom beside the security desk and set it about 10 feet from Ava's bench and just sat down. Like he'd decided the working portion of the evening was over for a while and hadn't felt the need to announce it. "You want to talk about it?" he said. "About what?" "Whatever's got you sitting in a lobby at 10 at night in a blizzard instead of going home." She could have deflected. She almost did. "I got fired tonight," she said instead. He took that in. "From your own company." "From my own company." "That's a specific kind of awful," he said. "Yeah." She turned the water bottle over in her hands. "They're saying I committed financial crimes, unauthorized trading, fraudulent approvals. They've frozen my accounts, personal and corporate, and they did it." She stopped. "They did it in a way that looked very clean, very organized, like they'd been preparing for it for a while." Logan was quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, where someone doesn't know what to say. The kind where someone is actually thinking. "Were you?" he asked. She looked at him. "Was I what? Were you doing those things?" Nobody had asked her that directly all night. Not her lawyer, not the people on the phone, not anyone in that conference room. The assumption had been either that she was guilty or that it didn't matter, that the appearance was enough. Nobody had just looked at her and asked. "No," she said. "Okay," he said. "You believe me?" "I don't know you well enough to believe or not believe you," he said. "But you said it like you meant it. And you don't seem like someone who's scared of having done something. You seem like someone who's angry about something being done to them. Those are different looks." She stared at him. "You got all that from watching me on my phone for 40 minutes? You hold your jaw different when you're guilty," he said. And then, after a second, "I don't actually know if that's true. I've just watched a lot of true crime." She laughed. A real one, unexpected, the kind that comes out before you know it's coming. It surprised her more than it seemed to surprise him. "What did you do?" she said. "Before." He leaned back in the chair. Not reluctant exactly, but taking a moment. "I was a financial analyst. M&A, mostly. Mergers and acquisitions for a mid-sized firm downtown. The kind of work where you're in the numbers 12 hours a day, and every deal is like a puzzle you have to take apart before the other side figures out you've taken it apart." "What firm?" "Archer Group." She knew the name. She'd done business with Archer Group twice, years ago. They went under. 4 years ago. He nodded. The partners were leveraged to the point of insanity. When 2 big deals fell through in the same quarter, the whole thing collapsed inside of a month. I saw it coming. Told my supervisor. Got told I was reading the numbers wrong and to focus on my accounts. A pause. I wasn't reading them wrong. What happened after? I lost the job. That was... He looked at the ceiling. That was about 6 months after my wife died. Cardiac event. Completely out of nowhere. She was 31. He said it straightforwardly, without asking for anything. So I had a 4-year-old and no job and a mortgage I couldn't cover. In that order. Ava didn't say she was sorry. It felt too small, and he didn't seem to be telling her for sympathy. "What did you do?" "Got a job. This job. It pays, the hours work with school pickup, and nobody asks me to do anything dishonest." He shrugged. "I've had worse work environments." "How old is your son now?" 8. His name's Miles. He pulled out his phone and showed her, briefly, a photo. A boy with his father's same watchful eyes and a gap where one of his front teeth should have been, grinning from the bleachers of what looked like a baseball field. "He's with my neighbor tonight. She's got a kid his age, so it works out." "He looks like you," Ava said. "He's smarter than me," Logan said. "I'm counting on that." By 11 o'clock they had moved the folding chair closer to the bench, because talking across 10 feet of marble at a quiet volume was becoming awkward. Curtis was still asleep. Outside, the storm was a sustained fury, and nothing was moving on the street. "Walk me through it," Logan said. "The timeline." "You don't have to..." I'm not doing it to be polite. I worked M&A for 6 years. If someone engineered this, there's a sequence to it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When did the transaction start? She thought. The SEC's inquiry covers the last 18 months, but the documents they showed us tonight, the board, they go back about 14 months. So 14 months ago, something started. Do you know what was different about Whitmore Capital 14 months ago? She opened her mouth and then closed it. The Meridian acquisition. What's that? A fintech company we acquired. It was the biggest deal we'd ever done, about $470 million. We were integrating their infrastructure into ours. It was messy, the way big integrations always are. There were a lot of moving parts, a lot of new access permissions getting granted, a lot of systems talking to each other for the first time. A lot of opportunities for someone to move things without those movements being immediately obvious. She felt something settle into place. The executive who led the integration was Martin Kessler, your CFO. My CFO who called this meeting tonight. Logan looked at her steadily. What did Martin Kessler have to gain? If the board seizes control at a depressed valuation, which a fraud scandal would guarantee, they can restructure and sell. Whitmore Capital, at its current legitimate valuation, is about $800 million. If the stock drops by 60–70% on news of an SEC investigation, you could take it private for $300, clear out the legal issues once you've got the records under your control, and flip it for $600 or $700 in 2 years. She paused. That's a $400 million upside. For the people who knew the investigation was coming and positioned themselves accordingly, they'd have had to start buying puts on my stock 14 months ago, she said. If someone with that kind of institutional knowledge made a series of very specific short positions. They looked at each other. I need to see the trading logs, she said. Not the ones they showed me tonight. The actual source logs before anything could be cleaned up. I have a backup. She stopped. My office. I have backups on an external drive in my office. Your office in this building. My office that I can no longer access as of... She checked her phone. 45 minutes ago. She sat with that for a moment. What floor is your office? Logan said. 43. I have building-wide access until 6 a.m., he said carefully. I'm required to clean all floors during the overnight shift. She looked at him. That's a significant thing to offer someone you've known for 2 hours. I'm not offering anything, he said. I'm just noting that I have building-wide access until 6 a.m. What you do with that information is entirely your decision. The lobby windows howled. Okay, Ava said. The elevator still worked. The 43rd floor was dark and empty and had that particular quiet of offices after hours, the kind that makes you aware of how much of a building's noise is just people. The emergency lighting kept things dim but workable, a gray, shadowless light that flattened everything and made the place feel like a photograph of itself. Logan waited by the elevator while she went to her office. The door was unlocked. They hadn't bothered to lock it, which told her something about how confident they were that there was nothing left for her to do here. She found the external drive in the bottom drawer of her desk, right where she'd left it 6 weeks ago. A habit from the early days of the company, before everything was cloud-based. Keep a physical backup of anything you can't afford to lose. She'd been keeping physical backups of Whitmore Capital's core financial transaction logs for 7 years. She stood in the dark of her office for a moment, holding the drive. Through the windows, both of them, the storm was total and obliterating and utterly indifferent to what was happening in this building. Her mother's photo was still in her bag. The green mug was still in her hand. She turned and walked back to the elevator. They used the small conference room on the ground floor, the one off the lobby that the building management used for tenant meetings, with a whiteboard and a projector and a table that seated 6. Logan found a laptop in the building management office that wasn't connected to the Whitmore Capital network, and Ava plugged in the external drive and started pulling files. What are we looking for? Logan said. Transaction approval chains, Ava said. Every transaction over a certain threshold requires an approval chain, 3 signatures minimum, 2 from executive level. What they're claiming is that I approved a series of unauthorized trades, but if I look at the metadata on those approvals, you can see when and where they were made. My digital signature has a timestamp and a location tag. It's tied to my device ID. She was scrolling through files now, pulling up logs. If these approvals were made under my credentials but without my device, the location data is going to be wrong. And if someone spoofed my device ID, there are ways to see that too. There are handshake records between the approval system and the network that would show the actual IP origin. Right. She found the file, opened it, ran the filter. The results came back in less than a minute. 47 transactions, 47 approvals made under her credentials, 31 of them from device IDs that were not her laptop, not her phone, and not any device registered to her in the company's system. That's 31, Logan said quietly. And look at the timestamps. She zoomed in. 12 of these were approved between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. I have never been, someone who does deal approvals in the middle of the night. Every executive assistant I've had will tell you that. My email logs will show you that. Who has access to the approval system? IT administrators. Martin, as CFO. The board has read access, but not... She stopped. Actually, after the Meridian integration, we extended write access to 3 people on the acquired side because we were still running dual systems. I don't remember who... She went back into the files. It's in the access logs from the integration. She found the integration access log, opened it. 3 names had been granted temporary write access to the Whitmore approval system 14 months ago. One of them was a name she didn't recognize. Someone from Meridian's IT team, probably. The second was Martin Kessler. The third was Derek Paulson. Derek, she said. The VP you mentioned? The one who was looking out the window during the board meeting. Her voice was very flat. He was looking out the window when they told me my accounts were frozen. I remember thinking it was strange. He's not usually the type to avoid confrontation. But he wasn't avoiding confrontation. She looked at the screen. He was bored. He was bored because he knew exactly how it was going to go. Logan was quiet for a moment. You need to get this to someone who can act on it before they realize you have it. My attorney, your attorney will tell you to protect the evidence and wait for the legal process, Logan said. How long does that take? Months? Years, potentially. And by the time that process runs its course, they complete the acquisition, get the records under their control, make sure nothing survives. They looked at each other across the table. You know any journalists? Logan said. I know a lot of journalists. Ones you trust? She thought about that. The word trust felt different than it had 12 hours ago. There's a woman named Sloan Merritt. She's with the Tribune's investigative unit. She paused. I've never liked her, actually. She wrote a profile of me 2 years ago that was uncomfortably accurate in places I didn't want it to be accurate. That sounds like someone you can trust, Logan said. Ava almost laughed again. That's a really strange way to think about it. Journalists who like you write stories that are good for you. Journalists who don't like you write stories that are true. He shrugged. In this situation, I think you want true. She sat back in the chair and looked at the screen. 31 fraudulent approvals. Location metadata that proved she hadn't made them. Access logs that put Martin Kessler and Derek Paulson in the system at the exact right times. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a complete picture, but it was a thread. And if someone knew how to pull it, this is going to get bad before it gets better, she said. Probably, Logan said. I could wake up tomorrow and this could be worse, even with all of this. Yes. You're not very reassuring. You don't need reassuring, he said. You're not scared. You're thinking. He nodded at the screen. Keep thinking. Outside, the blizzard pressed against every surface of the building with the single-minded patience of something that had no idea it was inconveniencing anyone. The city below was silent under 4 inches of snow, with more coming, and in the gray half-light of the building management conference room, 2 people who had met 2 hours ago bent over a laptop screen and began building the case that would change both of their lives. Ava found Sloan Merritt's email address in her phone and opened a new message. She sat there for a moment with her fingers over the keyboard. You need to think carefully about what you're doing. Once you send this, there's no version of events where you stay quiet and let the legal process. She thought about Martin's face. the rehearsed fold of his hands, the careful non-answer about who had voted against. She thought about Derek looking out the window, bored. She typed, "Sloan, I know it's the middle of the night. I need you to call me when you're awake. I have documentation of a fraud that makes the thing I've been accused of look like a rounding error. I'll explain everything. Ava Whitmore." She hit send before she could think about it anymore. Logan had found a second chair and was already pulling up a parallel set of logs, making a handwritten list on the back of a building management printout. Dates, transaction IDs, the gap between the approval timestamps and the standard business hours that should have governed them. "You don't have to stay," she said. "This isn't your problem." "I know," he said, and didn't look up from the list. She looked at him for a moment. The gray uniform, the handwritten notes, the total absence of any performance in the way he worked. The son named Miles. The wife who died at 31. The job he'd lost when he was right and no one listened. "Logan," she said. "Yeah?" "Thank you." He looked up then. Not dismissive, not self-deprecating, not any of the ways people deflect when they don't know what to do with gratitude. He just looked at her for a second and said, "We're not done yet," and went back to the list. The wind pressed against the windows. The storm kept falling. And Ava Whitmore, who had walked into this building as the CEO of an $800 million company and was walking out of it as something she didn't have a word for yet, sat down across from a man she'd known for 3 hours and got to work. Sloan Merritt called back at 2:17 in the morning. Ava had been half expecting it. The woman had a reputation for keeping strange hours, which was part of why her investigations always seemed to appear from nowhere, fully formed, like she'd been building them underground for months before anyone saw them surface. The phone buzzed against the conference table, and Ava picked it up before the second ring. "You know what time it is?" Sloan said, by way of greeting. Not a question. "I do." "And you still sent that email?" "I did." A pause. Ava could hear what sounded like a refrigerator opening, then closing. "How good is the documentation?" "Good enough that I'm sitting in my own building at 2 in the morning instead of at home." "You're in the building. They froze you out of the building." "The cleaning staff still has access." Ava glanced at Logan, who had stopped writing and was watching her with the focused stillness he seemed to bring to everything. "It's a long story." "I'm going to need you to walk me through all of it," Sloan said. "Not tonight, tomorrow. Somewhere neutral, not your office, not anywhere connected to Whitmore Capital. And I need to tell you up front, I'm not doing you any favors here. If I look at what you've got and it doesn't hold up, I'm not going to protect you." "I know." "And if it does hold up, the story I write is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, including some things about how your company was run that probably won't make you look great." "I know that too." Another pause, longer this time. "Send me what you've got. The metadata, the access logs, whatever you found tonight. I'll look at it before we meet." Ava looked at the screen, at the 31 transactions and the timestamps and the device IDs that didn't belong to her. She looked at the access logs, at Martin's name and Derek's name sitting there in plain text like a confession. Nobody had bothered to hide because nobody had expected her to go looking. "I'll send it in the next 10 minutes, she said. "Fine." Sloan paused. "For what it's worth, the profile I wrote. You told me I got it wrong." "I said you got some things wrong." "Which things?" Ava thought about it. "None of them, actually. That's why I said it." She could hear something shift in Sloan's voice. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. "Get some sleep, Whitmore. We'll talk tomorrow." The call ended. Ava set the phone down and sat quietly for a moment. "She'll run it?" Logan said. "She'll look at it. That's different." Ava pulled the laptop toward her and began compressing the files. She's not the kind of person who runs something because a source wants her to. She runs things because they're true and because she can prove they're true. Is that what you want? Someone who'll run it because it's true? "That's the only version that helps me," Ava said. She sent the files and closed the laptop. "The other versions just make noise." She leaned back in the chair. The building had settled into that deep night quiet where you could hear the ventilation system and nothing else. A low, sustained hum beneath everything. Outside the small conference room's single window, the blizzard was starting to thin. Still falling, but with less fury now, the wind dropping by degrees. "Tell me about the Archer group," she said. Logan looked up. "Why?" "Because you said you saw it coming. The collapse. And nobody listened." She looked at him. "I want to know what that was like." He was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, more like finding the right entry point into something he'd kept in a particular place for a long time. "It was gradual," he said finally. "That's the thing people don't understand about those situations. It's not one moment, it's 100 small moments where you see something and you think, that's strange, and then you file it away and move on because there's always a reason to move on. There's always another deadline, another deal, another thing that seems more pressing." "What was the first thing you noticed?" "Fee structures that didn't make sense on certain accounts. Not dramatically off, like 2–3% in the wrong direction on some of the smaller deals. Enough that you'd notice if you were looking for it, not enough that anyone was looking for it." He turned the pen in his fingers, and then I started noticing it on larger accounts. And then I pulled the approval histories on those accounts, and the numbers in the approvals didn't match the numbers in the executed trades. "Same pattern," Ava said. "Same pattern. A few degrees off here and there, compounding over time into something much larger." He set the pen down. "I went to my supervisor. He told me I was misreading the fee structure on international accounts. There were currency conversion layers that could explain the discrepancy if you assumed a certain kind of rounding. I went back and looked at it again, and no, there wasn't. The rounding explanation didn't hold." A pause. "I went back to him a second time with more documentation. That time he told me to focus on my own accounts." "And the third time?" "There wasn't a third time. 2 weeks later, the deals fell through and the firm collapsed and everyone was let go." He looked at the table. "I've spent 4 years wondering if I should have pushed harder, if I should have gone to someone else. The partners, the SEC directly, someone." He shook his head slowly. "But I was 30. I had a 4-year-old and a wife who was sick. We didn't know yet how sick. And I was scared of blowing up my career on something I couldn't fully prove." The word hung in the room. Ava thought about the 14 months of transaction logs sitting on the external drive beside the laptop. She thought about how long someone had been building that false record, how carefully they had piled one layer of documentation on top of another, and how she had never noticed because she had been focused on growth, and acquisition, and the 1,000 other demands of running a company at scale. "You're not the only one who missed things," she said. "You had more on your plate. That's not an excuse." "I didn't say it was." He picked up the pen again. "But beating yourself up about it right now doesn't do anything useful. You found it tonight. That's the thing that matters." She looked at him. "You have a very practical way of thinking." "I have a kid," he said. "You stop being able to afford the long spiral when you have a kid." She understood that differently than she would have 4 hours ago. Not the specifics. She didn't have children, had never had the kind of life that made room for them, but the underlying logic of it. The way a specific kind of responsibility could cut through all the paralysis and get you back to what was actionable. "What time does he wake up?" she said. "Miles?" Logan checked the time. 2:38. "About 6:30. He's got school." He said it the way parents always said those things, matter of fact, with the schedule already built into the cadence of the sentence. "I'll be done here at 6. Enough time to get back, make sure he's up, and has breakfast." "Every day?" "Every school day. He doesn't like cereal, which makes it more complicated than it sounds." Something moved across his face. Affection, weariness, the two things thoroughly intermixed. "He wants eggs. Not scrambled, not an omelet, specifically eggs with the yolk intact but fully cooked, which is a technical challenge I have somehow not mastered in 4 years of trying." Ava found herself smiling at that. "Medium eggs. You need to steam them for about 8 minutes in a covered pan with a little water." He stared at her. "Where did you learn that?" "I used to cook." She shrugged. "Before the company got big enough that I stopped going home at reasonable hours." She paused. "Which was about 6 years ago, so maybe that's not as useful a skill as I'm implying." "It's more useful than anything else I've learned tonight," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, dry and simple and genuinely meant, that made the whole terrible weight of the evening feel, just for a second, a little less total. The quiet came back. But it was a different kind of quiet than the lobby had been earlier. Less like waiting and more like two people who had stopped pretending they were strangers. Was she sick for a long time? Ava asked. Your wife. She wasn't sure why she asked it. She almost didn't. But it was past 2 in the morning in a building that felt like the only place in the world right now, and the storm was fading outside, and Logan had been honest with her about everything else. About 8 months, he said. Cardiac arrhythmia. She'd had it since she was a teenager. We knew. We'd managed it. And then one morning, Miles was at preschool, and I was at work, and she was home, and... He stopped. Not because he was going to cry, more like someone pausing at a door they'd opened many times before and didn't need to go all the way through. She was 31. Miles was 4. I'm sorry, Ava said. Not as a reflex. As an actual statement. Yeah. He looked at the window. It changes the way you think about things. What's worth being afraid of? What isn't? What you can afford to be stubborn about, and what you just have to let go. He turned back. You spend a lot of time angry for a while, and then one morning you're making eggs wrong for your kid, and you realize the anger's just... There's not enough room for it anymore. There's too much other stuff. Ava thought about Martin Kessler's folded hands, about Derek Paulson looking out the window. She thought about the anger that had been sitting like a coal in her chest all evening, and whether it would still be there in 4 years, or whether it would turn into something else, or whether it would just run out of room. I don't know how to do what you do, she said. What do you mean? Just... She gestured at him, somewhat vaguely. This, being fine. I'm not fine, he said. I'm just functional. That's the same thing at 2:30 in the morning. He considered that. Maybe. The ventilation hum continued its low, sustained note. Somewhere above them, the building shifted slightly, metal contracting in the cold, the sound moving through floors and walls like a low conversation. Ava looked at the whiteboard on the far wall of the conference room, where Logan had transferred his handwritten notes into a rough diagram of the transaction timeline, and she thought about what it looked like from the outside. 2 people in a ground floor conference room in a blizzard, piecing together a conspiracy with a whiteboard and an external hard drive and a borrowed laptop. They thought I'd go home, she said. Martin and Derek. They thought I'd get in a car and go home and be too shocked to do anything until morning. And instead you slipped on a wet floor. And instead I slipped on a wet floor. One of the great pivots of recent financial history, Logan said, and it was so tonally flat that it took her a half-second to register it as a joke. And by the time she did, she was already laughing. It felt strange to laugh. It also felt necessary. She looked at the whiteboard again when the laughter faded. 14 months. 31 fraudulent transactions. 2 names in an access log. And a journalist in possession of the compressed files who would either decide this was worth pursuing or would tell her the documentation wasn't strong enough and she'd have to go back to her attorney and wait out the legal process for the next 2 years, while Martin Kessler and Derek Paulson and whoever else was behind this dismantled the company she had built piece by piece. What's the weakest part? She said. Logan looked at the whiteboard. The device ID mismatch proves you didn't make those approvals, but it doesn't prove who did. The access log shows Kessler and Paulson had right access. That's not the same as showing either of them used it. The IP origin records. They'd be on the company's network servers, which you no longer have access to. Sloan would, Ava said. If the SEC inquiry is formal, they'll be subpoenaing records. If Sloan can get ahead of that, she needs a technical contact, someone who can explain the significance of those records to an investigator in a way that makes sense. I can do that. You're the accused, Logan said. The person explaining it needs to be seen as neutral. She looked at him. He looked back at her. I'm a janitor, he said, preemptively. You're a former financial analyst who spent 6 years in M&A and personally identified a systemic fraud pattern before a company collapse. A company collapse that I failed to stop. Because you were 30 years old with a sick wife and a 4-year-old and a supervisor who told you to go back to your desk, Ava said. That's not a failure. That's a situation. She held his gaze. You know what those IP records mean. You know how to explain what an approval chain is and why the metadata matters, and why the gap between the timestamps and normal business hours is significant. Sloan Merritt would have to spend 3 days getting a tech consultant up to speed on the basics before she could even start asking the right questions. Logan was quiet for a moment. "This isn't my fight." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Another moment. "Miles has school at 8, he said. "I know. And I've got a shift review at 7, which I'm going to miss regardless of how this goes because it's now almost 3 in the morning." "I know that too." He looked at the whiteboard, at the timeline he'd built from a building management printout and a ballpoint pen. "What does it actually get me?" he said. "Not theoretically, practically." It was the most pragmatic question anyone had asked her all night, which made sense because it was the kind of question someone asked when they were living a life with no margin for wishful thinking. She appreciated it. She didn't insult him by pretending it was easy to answer. "I don't know," she said. "I know what I'd want to offer you, but I don't know what's on the other side of tonight yet, and I'm not going to promise you something I can't guarantee." He nodded slowly. "Fair. What I can tell you," she said, "is that you're the smartest person I've had a conversation with in months, and I've been in a lot of rooms with people who are paid to be smart." He looked at her, and something in his expression, some small tightening, told her he hadn't heard that in a while. Maybe not since the Archer group. Maybe longer. "Miles really doesn't like scrambled eggs," he said after a moment. 8 minutes. Covered pan. Small amount of water so it steams. She paused. "You could also try a splash of butter instead of oil in the pan. Lower heat. Longer time. More forgiving." "You're giving me egg advice at 3 in the morning after losing $1 billion company." 400 million, she said. "And yeah." He exhaled. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something in between. Then he turned back to the whiteboard and picked up the marker and said, "The short positions. If someone on the board knew the SEC inquiry was coming 14 months ago, they would have positioned themselves in advance. What we need is a record of unusual options activity on Whitmore Capital stock starting around that period. That's publicly available. Sloan can pull it herself." "I have a broker contact who tracks unusual institutional options flow," Ava said. "She owes me a favor." "Then that's the next call." "At 3 in the morning. Tomorrow morning," he said. "First thing, before the markets open and before whoever did this figures out that someone went through these files tonight." Ava looked at the whiteboard, at the shape of everything Logan had laid out, the timeline, the access pattern, the gap in the transaction records that a good forensic accountant could turn into a map pointing directly at the people responsible. It was not complete. It was not enough, not yet, to do what needed to be done. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, she had always believed, were the things that mattered most. Everything else was just what you built on top of them. "I need to find somewhere to stay tonight," she said. Her accounts were frozen, which meant credit cards, which meant, "My neighbor," Logan said, without looking up from the whiteboard. "Janet. She's got a couch. She's up at 6 anyway with the kids. She won't care." Ava stared at him. "You're offering me your neighbor's couch." "I'm not offering you anything," he said, same tone as the building access earlier. "I'm just noting that she has a couch and she won't care." "You have a very specific way of not offering things. I found it cuts down on people feeling like they owe you." The snow outside had stopped. Through the conference room window, the city was completely white and completely still, every sound muffled under several inches of fresh accumulation. The streets were empty in a way that Chicago almost never was, a held breath kind of emptiness that wouldn't last past sunrise. Ava looked around the conference room, the whiteboard covered in Logan's handwriting, the borrowed laptop, the external drive still plugged into the side of it, the building management printout covered in notes that had started as a timeline and turned into something that looked, if you squinted at it right, like the outline of someone's undoing. "Okay," she said. "Let's write up what we have. All of it, organized. So when Sloan calls tomorrow, we're ready." Logan uncapped the marker. "Start with the transaction IDs or the access log?" "Access log," she said. "Always start with who had the ability to do the thing. Everything else follows from that." He wrote the header at the top of the whiteboard. Below it, in the precise, unhurried handwriting of someone who had learned long ago that slowing down to be accurate was faster than going fast and being wrong, He began to lay out the case that Ava Whitmore had started building the moment she hit send on that email. Outside, the plows were starting. You could hear them distantly. The scrape of metal on asphalt, the low grumble of engines pushing the storm to the sides of streets where it would pile up and freeze and stay for weeks, long after everything else about this night had moved into something different. Ava reached for the green mug, forgetting for a half second that there was nothing in it. She set it back down. Logan noticed but didn't say anything. She appreciated that too. Sloan Merritt called at 7:53 the next morning. Ava was on Janet Kowalski's couch, Logan's neighbor, a Polish-American woman in her late 40s who had opened her door at 4 a.m. without a single question beyond, "You eaten anything?" and who had produced a blanket and a pillow with the efficiency of someone for whom middle-of-the-night inconveniences were just a normal feature of being alive. When the phone buzzed against the coffee table and Ava grabbed it before the second ring the same way she had the night before. "I looked at your files," Sloan said. No preamble. "The metadata is clean." "I know it's clean. I didn't fabricate it." "I didn't say you fabricated it. I said it's clean, meaning it looks like original source data and not something that's been touched since it was generated." A pause. "The device ID mismatches are significant. 31 transactions approved from devices not registered to you, including 12 between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Do you have anyone who can speak to your working patterns? Establish that you categorically don't do business approvals in the middle of the night." "Every assistant I've had for the last 7 years. My attorney has contact information." "I'll need them." Another pause. Longer. "The access log is the more interesting piece. Kessler and Paulson having right access to your approval system. Was that disclosed to the board?" "It was disclosed as a technical integration measure during the Meridian acquisition. The board approved the integration plan. Whether they understood what right access to the approval system actually meant in practice," Ava stopped. "Probably not. It's the kind of thing that gets buried in a 200-page integration report." "Buried by whom?" "The integration was managed by Martin Kessler." She could hear Sloan writing. "I need to meet with you today. And whoever helped you put this together last night, you said there was someone." "There was. I want to talk to them." Ava looked at the time. 7:55. Logan would be getting Miles ready for school. She'd heard them through the wall about 20 minutes ago. The muffled sounds of a morning routine, a child's voice asking something, Logan's lower response, the sound of a cabinet opening and closing. She had lain on the couch and listened to the ordinary sounds of a life that was nothing like hers and felt something she didn't have an immediate name for. "I'll ask him," she said. "It's his decision." "Fine. Call me when you know. I want to meet by noon." Logan said yes. He said it the same way he said most things, without drama. After a short pause that meant he'd actually thought about it rather than reacting. He was standing in the kitchen in jeans and a different shirt, the gray uniform folded on a chair by the door, and Miles was at the small kitchen table eating eggs. The yolk intact and fully cooked, Ava noticed, and felt something shift warmly in her chest, with the focused intensity that 8-year-olds brought to food they actually liked. "She wants to talk to both of us by noon," Ava said. "I know what that means," Logan said. He poured coffee into 2 mugs and set one in front of Ava without asking. "It means she's already decided to run it. She just wants to see if we hold up in person." "Probably." "Miles," Logan said without raising his voice. "Finish up. Bus in 10. "I know," Miles said, not looking up from the eggs. "You always say you know." "Because I always know." Logan looked at Ava with an expression that was 70% resignation and 30% something that looked like pride. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug and for the first time in roughly 11 hours felt the particular relief of something warm. "Will you be okay here?" Logan said, "until I get back from the bus stop?" "I think I can manage your neighbor's couch unsupervised. She's going to offer you breakfast," he said. "Just take it. She gets offended if you don't." Ava nodded. "Logan." "Yeah?" "Thank you. Again, for..." She gestured at the kitchen, at the coffee, at the general fact of not being alone in a hotel lobby somewhere trying to get a credit card to work. "All of this." He picked up Miles's empty plate. "Medium eggs," he said. Covered pan. Miles looked up. What? Nothing. Logan ruffled the boy's hair, which Miles tolerated with the dignity of someone who had long since accepted that this was simply something that happened to him. Get your backpack. They met Sloane Merritt at a coffee shop in Pilsen, the kind of place that was too small to be fashionable and too old to care, with mismatched furniture and a counter that had been the same shade of yellowed white since approximately 1987. Sloane was already there when they arrived. A woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away without deciding to, a laptop open, a recorder on the table, a cup of coffee she'd clearly been nursing for a while. She looked at Ava the way you looked at someone when you were trying to reconcile the version of them you'd written about with the version sitting across from you. Then she looked at Logan, which was a different kind of look. Assessment, the rapid recalibration of not having been told quite what to expect. Logan Hayes, she said. Sloane Merritt. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. You worked M&A at Archer Group. For 6 years, yes. You left when they folded, so technically they let everyone go, so yes. Sloane looked between them. How did you end up in this building on this particular night? I work nights, Logan said. She slipped on a wet floor. A beat. Sloane looked at Ava. Seriously? Wet marble, Ava said. I would have gone down hard. Sloane made a short sound that might have been a laugh and turned back to her laptop. Walk me through the access log. I want to hear you explain it, not read it. What does right access to the approval system actually mean in operational terms? Logan leaned forward slightly. The approval system is a gated transaction authorization platform. Every financial transaction above a threshold, in Whitmore Capital's case, anything above $50,000, requires a digital approval chain before it executes. 2 executive-level signatures minimum, 3 for anything above $5 million. The approvals are cryptographically signed with device-specific credentials, which is why the device IDs are attached to each one. He said it evenly in the register of someone explaining something they understood well enough to explain simply. Right access means you can interact with the approval chain. You can submit approvals, modify pending items, and, depending on the permission level, you can insert approvals into the chain after the fact. Sloane looked up. Insert approvals after the fact? With the right access level, yes. It would appear in the log as having been submitted at the time of transaction, but the actual entry timestamp and the approval timestamp would have a discrepancy at the metadata level. And Kessler and Paulson had that level of access. For the duration of the integration period, yes. The access was granted 14 months ago and, based on what we found in the logs last night, appears to have never been revoked. Sloane typed for a moment. Who would revoke it? The system administrator, which would have been an IT function. Ava picked it up from there. IT at Whitmore Capital reported to the COO at the time of the integration. The COO was Nathan Reyes, who left the company 8 months ago. She paused. He left under what I was told were personal circumstances. He took a significant severance. Sloane looked at her. You think Reyes knew? I think the timing is worth noting. I need to find Reyes. I have a last known address, Ava said. Phoenix. He moved there after he left. A beat. I can give you his contact information. I'll find him myself. Sloane turned her recorder slightly. The short positions, you mentioned in your email you thought someone positioned against the stock in advance. I have a contact who tracks unusual institutional options flow. I called her this morning. Ava set her phone on the table, a screenshot open. Beginning approximately 13 months ago, there was a pattern of put options on Whitmore Capital stock purchased through 3 different brokerage accounts. Small positions individually, but the timing and the strike prices are, they were anticipating a 30 to 40% decline, which is exactly what happened when the board's statement went public last night. Sloane enlarged the screenshot on her own screen. She studied it for a long moment. These accounts, registered to Shell LLCs, Delaware incorporations, which is standard, but 2 of them were incorporated within 6 months of the Meridian acquisition, which is when the access was granted. Which is when the access was granted, Ava said. The coffee shop filled slightly around them. A mid-morning crowd, people with laptops, a woman with a stroller, Two older men at the counter having a conversation about the previous night's snowfall with the satisfied authority of people who had survived many Chicago winters. None of them were paying any attention to the three people at the corner table. Sloane closed her laptop. Just slightly. Not all the way, more like a conversational shift. "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead," Ava said. "Is there anything in how Whitmore Capital was run that could be legitimately criticized? Practices that weren't technically fraudulent, but that, in the context of a story about a major investigation, would read badly?" Ava looked at her. "You asked me something like that 2 years ago, for the profile. And you said I got it wrong. And I told you on the phone last night I was lying about that." Ava wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Yes, there are things. We pushed the line on some fee disclosures in the early years. Not illegally, but in ways I wouldn't defend now. We had a compensation structure for mid-level analysts that favored short-term deal volume over long-term client outcomes. I knew about it. I didn't change it fast enough." She paused. "None of that is what they're accusing me of. But it's real, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't." Sloane studied her, then she turned to Logan. "You worked with her for one night? Why are you here?" He didn't seem to find the question strange. "Because I know what this pattern looks like," he said. "I saw it before at a different company, and I didn't do enough. I'm not interested in watching the same thing happen twice." "That's it?" "That's most of it." "What's the rest?" A pause. "The rest is that what they did to her is wrong, and I'm in a position to do something about it, so I'm doing it." He said it the way he said most things, without emphasis, without asking for credit. Is that a sufficient answer? Sloane held his gaze for a moment. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find enough of it. She opened her laptop again. "I need 3 to 5 days to verify what you've given me, independently. I'm going to reach out to your attorney, Ava, and I'm going to need a name at the SEC inquiry if there is one, someone who can tell me whether the evidence we're talking about is consistent with what they're finding." "The inquiry is in its early stages," Ava said, "as of last night." Early stages move fast when someone hands them a roadmap. Sloane picked up the recorder and clicked it off. "Off the record for a moment." "Okay." "The board's statement went out at midnight. I've already had 2 calls this morning from people at financial publications asking me if I've talked to you. The story is moving fast whether I write it or not. If I write it, I control the framing, I verify the evidence, and I give you the best shot at a narrative that reflects what you actually have. If I don't write it, someone else will, and they will not be as careful." "I know," Ava said. "That's why I called you. I'm going to need you to not talk to anyone else in the meantime. Not on background, not off the record, nothing. If this leaks before I've verified it, the story becomes about a CEO trying to manage her own scandal instead of about a boardroom conspiracy." She looked at Ava steadily. "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Can your attorney do that?" "I'll make sure of it." Sloane nodded. She closed the laptop fully and gathered her things, then paused. She looked at Logan. "The Archer Group collapse," she said. "Did you ever tell anyone officially? Regulators? Anyone?" "No," he said. "Would you be willing to talk about it on the record, as background for this story?" Logan considered. "What purpose does it serve?" "Pattern of behavior," Sloane said. "This isn't the first time someone has used integration access to manipulate transaction logs. If I can show that Kessler worked in proximity to the Archer Group during that period—" "He didn't," Ava said, then stopped. "Wait." She looked at Logan. "Archer Group did M&A work. Who were their counterparties in the 18 months before they collapsed?" Logan went very still. "Meridian," he said. The word sat on the table like something that had been there all along, waiting to be noticed. Sloane opened her laptop again. Check. They were there for another 2 hours. The mismatched chairs got uncomfortable and nobody moved. Sloane ordered a second coffee. Logan pulled up archived deal records on his phone, things he remembered from the Archer Group years, specific transaction structures that had never quite made sense to him, counterparty names he'd filed away in the particular mental archive of someone who couldn't stop analyzing things even when the job was gone. Meridian FinTech had been an Archer Group client for 2 years before Archer collapsed. The deals were small, infrastructure advisory, nothing that should have left a significant footprint. But the billing structures were unusual, Logan remembered. Fee arrangements that moved money in ways that weren't standard. He'd flagged it at the time as one of the anomalies in the fee discrepancy analysis he'd taken to his supervisor. He'd been told to go back to his desk. If Kessler has a connection to Meridian that predates the acquisition, Sloan said, this isn't opportunistic fraud. This is a long-form operation. Someone built a company to be an acquisition vehicle. Meridian was legitimate, Ava said. It was a functioning fintech company with real clients and real revenue. I did due diligence. Your due diligence was managed by Martin Kessler. She said it quietly. Sloan typed without speaking for nearly a minute. Then, I need to find the original Meridian Incorporation documents and the investor records from their Series A and B rounds. She looked up. Who did Meridian's early-stage funding? A consortium, Ava said. 3 VC firms. It was in the acquisition prospectus. I can remember 2 of them, Callaway Ventures and a firm called Northbridge Capital. Northbridge Capital, Sloan repeated. She typed it, paused, looked at the screen. Then, carefully, Northbridge Capital's managing partner is a man named Gerald Foss. I don't know that name. He's not particularly public. Sloan turned the laptop screen slightly so Ava could see it, a company registry page. But Gerald Foss sits on 3 boards. One of them is a private investment vehicle called Caro Partners. She paused. Caro Partners holds a 7% stake in Whitmore Capital. Ava looked at the screen. He's a board member, she said. He voted on the suspension. Did he vote for or against? Ava thought about the conference room, the 14 people, the 11-to-1 vote, the single dissenter whose name Douglas Farr had refused to give her. She thought about who at that table might have had a reason to vote against, not out of loyalty, but out of self-protection, because they understood exactly what was happening and wanted some distance from it. I don't know, she said. I don't know who voted against. I'll find out, Sloan said. But Ava, if Foss was the money behind Meridian, and Meridian was built as an acquisition vehicle, then what you're looking at isn't Martin Kessler running a scheme. Kessler's the operator. Foss is the architect. Logan had been quiet for the last several minutes, reading something on his phone. Now he set it down. Caro Partners filed a 13D with the SEC 14 months ago, he said. It's in the public database. They disclosed a change in investment intent for their Whitmore Capital stake, from passive to active. Sloan looked at him. That's the same month the access was granted, he said. No one spoke for a moment. Outside, the street was bright with the particular hard brightness that followed a major snowfall, everything white and reflective, the light bouncing off every surface. A city bus moved slowly past the window, clearing a channel through the snow that had packed against the curb. This is bigger than one CFO cooking books, Logan said. Yes, Sloan said. They built the whole thing, built the company, got it close enough to Ava's that an acquisition made strategic sense, maneuvered it into position, and then used the integration as the mechanism. He paused. The fraud was the last step. Everything else was just set up. How long? Ava said. Her voice came out flat, which was the only way she could manage it right now. How long were they building this? Sloan looked at the screen. Northbridge's first investment in Meridian was 6 years ago. 6 years. Ava had started the company 7 years ago, which meant that while she was building something, someone else had been studying it and deciding how to take it apart. While she was hiring and growing and flying to bell-ringing ceremonies and giving Martin Kessler something to cry about, someone had been watching and waiting and positioning. He cried, she said, out loud, which she hadn't meant to. Logan looked at her. Martin, at the NASDAQ closing. He actually cried. She looked at the table. I gave him a hard time about it for a month. People can hold more than one thing at a time, Logan said. He said it without judgment, which somehow made it worse and better simultaneously. Sloan was already on her phone, texting someone. I have a source at the SEC who I can brief confidentially. They can tell me whether Caro Partners or Foss's name has come up in the inquiry already. If it hasn't, this is information they need. She looked up. I want you both available for the next 72 hours. Phone on, responsive. If I need to verify something, I'm not going to wait for a call back. Understood, Ava said. Sloan stood, She was already reaching for her coat. One more thing. She looked at Ava with something that was direct and not unkind. The story I write is going to be a story about a corporate conspiracy, but it's also going to be a story about what happened in that building last night, and that means you're in it, both of you. What? She paused. Some people are going to find the janitor detail. His name is Logan Hayes, Ava said. He's a former financial analyst. Some people are going to find it hard to believe, Sloan finished, without missing a beat. Let them, Logan said. The evidence is what it is. Sloan looked at him for a moment. Then she put her coat on and picked up her bag. 72 hours, she said, and walked out into the cold. Tut. They sat there for a minute after she left. The coffee shop noise filled back in around them. The espresso machine, the low music, the bus outside making its laborious way down the snow-packed street. 6 years, Ava said. Yeah. I built a company for 7 years, and someone spent 6 of those years building a mechanism to take it. That's what happened. She stopped. She couldn't find the word for what it was. It was too large for one word. It was the particular vertigo of understanding that the ground you'd been standing on had been in motion the whole time without your knowing. I need to call my attorney. You should. She picked up the phone and set it down again. Do you know what the strangest part is? Tell me. If it hadn't been for the storm, she looked at the window, at the bright aftermath of the blizzard. If it hadn't been for the snow, I would have gotten in a car and gone home and gone to sleep and woken up and called my lawyer and done everything the right way, through the right channels, and waited. And they would have had time to clean it up. Probably, Logan said. So in a very specific and completely ridiculous way, I owe this to the weather. And a wet floor. And a wet floor. She looked at him. And you. He picked up his coffee cup. It was empty. He looked at it and set it back down. I'm going to be late picking Miles up from school. Call your neighbor. Janet? Yeah. He was already reaching for his phone. She'll be annoyed. I thought she was accommodating. She's accommodating and annoyed. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He typed a text. She's going to ask what's going on. I'm not going to know what to tell her. Tell her it's complicated. She hates that answer. Everyone hates that answer, Ava said. It's still usually true. He sent the text and put the phone away. He looked at the tables, at the empty cups. The recorder Sloan had left an indentation in the surface of the sugar packet she'd moved. And then he looked at Ava with the same clear, assessing look he'd used in the lobby the night before, when she'd been gripping his arm and trying to remember which direction was up. You okay? He said. No, she said, but I know what we're doing. That's enough for right now. He nodded. That was enough of an answer for him. Outside, Chicago was white and brutal and beginning, in the way of cities after major weather events, to slowly restart itself. Buses moving, sidewalks being cleared in patches, people reappearing on the streets with the tentative energy of those who had waited out something difficult and come out the other side still standing. Ava left a tip on the table, the last cash she had in her wallet, which turned out to be $11, which was what she had left after $800 million had been frozen by midnight, and stood up and put her coat on. Come on, she said. Let's get you to your son. Sloan's story ran on a Thursday morning, 71 hours after their meeting in Pilsen. Ava was at her attorney's office when it published, a borrowed desk and a conference room that Richard Cho's firm had quietly made available after she explained the situation in enough detail that he understood both the legal stakes and the personal ones. She had been sleeping on Janet's couch for 3 nights by then, which Janet had stopped making any mention of, as though Ava had simply always been part of the household inventory. Miles had started saying goodbye to her in the mornings when he left for school, the same flat, declarative goodbye he gave Logan, which was the highest form of acknowledgement an 8-year-old could extend to a near stranger, and which Ava understood as such. She was reading through a draft response to the board's formal suspension notice when Richard came in and set his phone on the desk in front of her without saying anything. The headline read, Whitmore Capital Fraud, How a 6-Year Conspiracy Framed a CEO and Nearly Stole an $800 million Company. Below it, the Tribune's investigative masthead, Sloan Merritt's byline. Ava read the first 3 paragraphs standing up. Then she sat down and read the rest of it. It was the most uncomfortable thing she had ever read about herself, and it was the most accurate. Sloane had done exactly what she'd promised. She'd verified every piece of evidence independently, sourced it separately from what Ava had given her, and built a parallel evidentiary case that didn't rely on Ava's credibility alone. The story was about the conspiracy. It was also, in the margins of itself, a precise and honest portrait of a CEO who had built something remarkable and managed it imperfectly and trusted people she shouldn't have trusted. Not because she was naive, but because she was busy and because the people she trusted had worked very hard to deserve it. The part about the fee disclosures, Richard said when she set the phone down. It's accurate, Ava said. I know it's accurate. I need to know if you're prepared for the follow-up. I'm prepared for it, because there will be follow-up. The financial press is going to… Richard. She looked at him. I know. We move through it. The fee disclosures are the least of what's happening right now. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Foss's attorneys have already issued a statement calling the story defamatory. What did Sloane say? She said, and I'm quoting directly here, our legal team is confident in the documentation. He permitted himself a small, satisfied expression. She's not worried. No, Ava said, she wouldn't be. Her phone had been buzzing since she sat down. She turned it over. 40-something notifications in the 12 minutes since the story went live. Former colleagues, financial press contacts, 3 people from the board whose messages she would get to when she was ready, and one from a number she didn't recognize that turned out, when she opened it, to be from Nathan Reyes. I heard from Merritt yesterday. I know what you found. I should have said something when I left. I'm sorry I didn't. If it helps, I can confirm the access was never revoked intentionally. I raised it twice and was told it would be handled. It wasn't. I have the emails. She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Richard and to Sloane and set the phone face down again. Reyes has documentation, she told Richard. He was already reading the forwarded message. This is significant. I know. This puts Kessler in the position of having been informed that the access existed and choosing not to revoke it. I know, Richard. Ava. He lowered the phone. This might actually work. She looked at him. He had been her attorney for 4 years, and in 4 years she had never heard him say anything might actually work with that particular inflection. The one that meant he hadn't been certain until just now. The one that meant the ground was more solid than he'd let himself believe. Get Reyes on the phone, she said. The 72 hours before the story ran had not been quiet. Logan had gone back to work the night after their meeting with Sloane, because the Bills didn't care about corporate conspiracies, and Miles needed breakfast in the morning regardless of what was happening on the 43rd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. He'd worked his regular shift and come home at 6 and made eggs and gotten Miles to school and slept for 4 hours, and then sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and pulled up every public record he could find on Caro Partners, Northbridge Capital, and Gerald Foss. Ava had been sitting across from him for most of it. It had become a natural arrangement without anyone deciding it was one. Janet's couch was on the other side of a wall from Logan's kitchen, and the kitchen table was where work happened in that apartment, so that was where they worked. Miles did homework at one end of the table, and Logan and Ava worked at the other, which had required some renegotiation of space on the second day when Miles declared that his math worksheet needed the part of the table that Ava's laptop was on. Can you move? Miles had said, standing beside her with the worksheet. Sure, Ava had said, and moved. Miles spread his worksheet out with the satisfaction of someone who had handled a logistics problem effectively. He studied the first question. Do you know fractions? I do. Good. He slid the worksheet slightly toward her. This one doesn't make sense. She looked at it. It didn't make sense because the problem was written unclearly. A common denominator question phrased in a way that implied a different operation than what was intended. She explained the discrepancy. Miles listened, which she was already learning he did carefully when he thought the information was going to be useful, and then he worked through the problem himself without asking her to do it, which she appreciated. You're good at explaining, he told her when he'd finished. Thank you. My dad explains things good too, but sometimes he uses words I don't know. That's a hazard of knowing a lot of words. Miles considered this. Do you know a lot of words? Some. My dad says knowing a lot of words is just knowing a lot of ways to say true things. She looked at Logan, who was on the other side of the table and clearly pretending he hadn't heard this. He's right about that, she said. Miles went back to his worksheet. She'd looked at Logan over the top of her laptop screen, and he'd looked back, briefly, and neither of them had said anything, which was the kind of exchange that meant something without requiring words to mean it. That had been on the second day. On the third day, Sloan called twice, once to verify the Caro Partners Incorporation timeline, and once to tell them the story was going to press the following morning. I want to be clear about something, Sloan said on the second call. Once this runs, the people named in it are going to move fast. Foss has resources. Kessler has lawyers. The window between publication and legal counteraction is where the SEC has to move, and they move at their own pace. Are they aware of what you're publishing? Ava asked. They're aware a story is coming. I confirmed to their press office that we'd be publishing material related to the ongoing inquiry. A pause. I may have also sent an embargoed copy to a contact inside the enforcement division. Sloan. The evidence supports the story. The story is true. The SEC doing their job faster benefits everyone except the people who did this. She didn't sound apologetic. She sounded like someone who had made a calculation and stood behind it. You can be annoyed about the process if you want. I'm not annoyed, Ava said. I just want to know everything that's happening. That's fair. Now you know. The call from the SEC came at 11:15 the morning the story ran, while Ava was still in Richard's conference room working through the implications of Nathan Reyes's message. It was a formal contact, a senior investigator named Paulette Diaz, whose voice was the particular variety of neutral that suggested a great deal of activity just below the surface. Ms. Whitmore, I want to be direct with you. The publication this morning is consistent with findings our team has been developing independently. I'm not in a position to share details of an active inquiry, but I want you to know that we are treating this as a priority matter and that your cooperation, and the cooperation of anyone else with relevant documentation, would be valuable to us. My attorney is here, Ava said. Can I put you on speaker? Please. She set the phone on the conference table. Richard pulled his chair closer. This is Richard Cho, Ms. Whitmore's counsel. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for taking the call. I'm going to be brief. We'd like to schedule a formal interview with Ms. Whitmore at the earliest opportunity. We'd also like any original documentation she has, particularly the transaction metadata and access logs referenced in this morning's article. And we're going to need the name and contact information of anyone else who was involved in assembling that documentation. Ava looked at Richard. Richard gave a small, precise nod. Logan Hayes, Ava said. I'll give you his number. What? Logan got his call from the SEC at noon while he was at the laundromat 2 blocks from his apartment because the building's machines were broken and Miles was almost out of clean school clothes. He stood between 2 rows of dryers with a bag of quarters in one hand and answered with the other and spoke to Paulette Diaz for 11 minutes in the same level, unhurried voice he used for everything, giving her exactly what she asked for and nothing she didn't. After the call, he sat on the bench by the folding tables for a few minutes. He thought about the version of this morning that would have happened if he'd worked a different building, if the storm had hit a day earlier or a day later, if he'd already put the wet floor sign out, if he'd been on a different floor when Ava Whitmore's heel found the only wet patch in 40 feet of marble. He thought about the Archer group, about the supervisor who'd told him to go back to his desk, about the way he'd driven home that day, the day the firm collapsed, the day they'd all been let go at once in a conference room that had looked, in retrospect, a lot like the one on the 43rd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, and sat in the parking garage of his apartment building for 20 minutes because he hadn't known what he was going to tell Diane. Diane, who had been sick by then, though they hadn't known how sick. Diane, who had looked at him when he came in and said, without any particular drama, "Okay, we'll figure it out." He'd spent 4 years since then figuring it out, small and daily. A shift that paid, and a boy who needed breakfast, and a neighbor who kept an eye on things, and a table where the work happened and homework got done. He didn't think of himself as someone who'd been waiting for something. He'd been too busy for waiting. But sitting on the laundromat bench with a bag of quarters and an SEC investigator's direct number in his recent calls, he understood that the night in the lobby had not just been about Ava Whitmore's company. It had been about the thing he'd failed to do 4 years ago. The thing he'd driven home that day, carrying, quiet and heavy. And the fact that when the same pattern appeared again in front of him, this time he had the presence of mind and the sheer accidental availability to do something about it. He didn't think Diane would have called it fate. She wasn't that kind of person. She would have said, "You were there. You knew what to look at. You looked. That was enough." He put the quarters in the machine and went home to be there when Miles got off the bus. False. The counter statement from Gerald Foss's legal team ran by early afternoon. A dense, carefully worded document accusing the Tribune of publishing unverified allegations and describing the story as a coordinated attempt to interfere with legitimate corporate governance. It was well constructed, Ava thought, when Richard forwarded it to her. It addressed several of the story's secondary claims directly and cast enough ambient doubt on the sourcing to give pause to anyone who read it without access to the underlying documentation. "He hired Bancroft and Lyle," Richard said. "They're expensive." "He can afford expensive," Ava said. "The question is whether expensive is fast enough." It wasn't. By 3 o'clock, 2 financial publications had run their own follow-up pieces based on the public documentation Sloan had cited in the original story. By 4, a former Meridian board member, someone Ava had never met, who had apparently been uncomfortable with certain company decisions for years, gave a recorded interview to a wire service describing pressure from Northbridge Capital to facilitate the acquisition timeline. By 5:15, federal agents appeared at Martin Kessler's home in Winnetka. Ava was told about the last one by her attorney, who heard it from a contact, who heard it from a neighbor of Kessler's, who had apparently filmed it on a phone and posted it somewhere before thinking better of it. She sat with that information for a moment. "He was in his driveway," Richard said, "coming home from somewhere. They were waiting." She thought about Martin's face in the conference room, the rehearsed hands, the photograph of the two of them on the NASDAQ closing day, framed on his office wall. She thought about how long he'd been carrying the weight of what he was doing while she'd been in the same building as him, trusting him with the financial architecture of everything she'd built. "Are you all right?" Richard asked. "I'm thinking," she said. "Take your time." She thought about it for another minute. Whether she felt satisfied or vindicated or any of the things she'd imagined she might feel if something like this happened. She felt tired. She felt the specific tiredness of 4 days without a real bed and 3 nights of watching the ceiling of Janet Kowalski's living room and going over the same sequences of events in her mind until the order of them was as familiar as a route she'd walked 100 times. She also felt, under the tired, something quieter and more solid, something that hadn't been there 4 days ago. "I want to call Logan," she said. "Of course." Richard stood. "I'll give you a few minutes." He left. She picked up the phone. Logan answered on the second ring. Miles was audible in the background. Some kind of television program, something animated by the sound of it. "Kessler," she said. "They went to his house." A pause. "I heard. Reyes has documentation on the access logs, email chains showing Kessler was informed it was never revoked." She paused. "The SEC is moving faster than I expected." "That's because Sloan got them the roadmap," Logan said. "What happened in the building that night gave them a starting point they didn't have before. It accelerated the timeline." "I know." She looked at the window of the conference room. A different view than the 43rd floor, lower and less grand, a street-level perspective on a Chicago afternoon in winter. The sidewalk still tracked with the footprints and salt stains of the ongoing aftermath of the blizzard. "How's Miles?" "Fine. He wants to know if you're coming for dinner." She blinked. "He asked that?" He didn't phrase it as an invitation. He phrased it as a logistical inquiry. "Is Ava eating here?" Those were his words. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know." She was quiet for a moment. Through the phone, she could hear the animated program and something that sounded like Miles explaining something to no one in particular with great conviction. "I should probably get a hotel," she said. "My accounts are... They should be releasing the freeze. My attorney is working on an emergency petition. It might be today, it might be tomorrow. Okay, Logan said. I mean, I should stop imposing on your neighbor. You're not imposing on Janet. Janet has told you 3 times you're not imposing. She's being polite. Janet is not a polite person, Logan said. If she thought you were imposing, she would say, you are imposing. That is her exact communication style. A pause. Come for dinner. You can figure out the hotel tomorrow. She looked at the ceiling. Okay. Miles has a math test tomorrow. He might ask you to help him study. That's fine. And Janet is making something with kielbasa that I am contractually obligated to eat because she watched Miles twice this week. I'm just warning you. I like kielbasa. Do you? I grew up in a studio apartment in Wicker Park, Logan. I know what kielbasa is. A sound that was close to a laugh. 6 o'clock, he said. Don't be late. She serves at 6 on the dot and she doesn't wait. Derek Paulson was arrested on Friday morning. Ava read about it on her phone, sitting at Logan's kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Her own coffee this time, from a bag she'd bought at the corner store the morning before. A small domestic gesture that had felt presumptuous when she did it, and now just felt like the thing that happened when you'd been at the same table for 4 days. She read the article twice. The charges were detailed and specific. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit market manipulation. A co-conspirator was identified in the filing as a currently unnamed individual whose assets had been subject to emergency restraint by the court. Gerald Foss, her attorney, had confirmed when she texted him. The unnamed individual was Foss. She set the phone down. Logan came out of the back hallway, pulling his uniform shirt on over a t-shirt. He had a day shift today, a fill-in for someone who was sick, which meant he'd be gone by 7 and back by mid-afternoon. He saw her face when he came in and stopped in the doorway. Derek Paulson, she said. He came to the table and looked at the article on her phone. He read it standing up. She watched his face, the small, controlled way he processed it, not celebratory, not grim, just absorbing. Foss too, she said, unnamed, but my attorney confirmed. He set the phone down, went to the counter, and poured coffee. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would, Ava said. No, he said. It usually doesn't. I thought I'd feel... She looked at the table. Something cleaner. You feel relieved and exhausted and a little sick, and also like none of it changes the fact that it happened, Logan said. He said it the way he said things he knew from experience rather than theory. Yes. That's normal. He picked up his coffee. The clean feeling takes longer. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. You just sort of move into the next thing and look back at this later and realize it doesn't have the same weight it used to. She looked at him. He was standing at the counter in his gray uniform shirt with his coffee, and he looked the same as he always looked, unperformed. She had been in rooms with a lot of very capable people over the last 7 years, people who were smart and driven and confident in all the ways that running a company required. None of them had ever struck her the way Logan Hayes did, which was the way someone struck you when you understood that their competence was not for display. It was just what they were. The board called my attorney last night, she said. They want to discuss reinstating my executive authority. Logan said nothing, waiting. I haven't decided what I want to do. What are the options? Go back or don't? And I don't know yet. She wrapped her hands around the mug. The company is mine. I built it. Part of me thinks walking away from it is letting them win in a different way. The people who did this are being criminally charged, Logan said. That's not a version of them winning. No, but the company... She stopped. I don't know if I want to go back to what it was, and I don't know how to make it something different, and I don't know if those are real concerns or if I'm just tired. Probably both, Logan said. She almost smiled. You're very unhelpful sometimes. You know that? You don't need me to tell you what to do. You're going to figure out what you want and do it. He finished his coffee and set the cup in the sink. That's how you've handled everything else. I had help. He looked at her, briefly. You had a wet floor and some borrowed equipment, and about 6 hours of someone's time. You did the rest. That's not... Miles, he called toward the back of the apartment. 7 minutes. A sound of movement. a thump that suggested a backpack being retrieved from a floor. "I know," Miles called back. Logan looked at Ava. "I have to go. You good?" "I'm good." "There's more coffee." "I see it." He picked up his keys and his jacket. At the door he paused, not quite looking back. "Whatever you decide about the company," he said, "it should be what you actually want, not what proves something." She looked at him. "Just—" He opened the door. "Think about what you want the next 7 years to look like, not what you want the last 7 years to mean." He left. Miles appeared 30 seconds later in the kitchen doorway with his backpack on, his jacket only half zipped, one sneaker untied in a way that suggested he was aware of it and had decided it was someone else's problem. "Your shoe," Ava said. "I know," Miles said. "You always say you know." He looked at her with the flat patience of someone who had heard this line before, from a different source. "Because I always know," he said, and sat down at the kitchen table to tie it, which he did slowly and with great concentration, his tongue pressed slightly to his lower lip. Ava watched him. She thought about what Logan had said, about what the next 7 years could look like instead of what the last 7 years had to mean, about the difference between going back and going forward, and whether those were the same direction or completely different ones. Miles finished the shoe. He stood up. He looked at her the way he sometimes did, direct and brief, a passing assessment. "Are you going to be here when I get home?" he said. She didn't answer right away. He waited, which he was better at than most adults she knew. "I don't know," she said. He considered that. "Okay," he said, and picked up his backpack and went to the door with the equanimity of an 8-year-old who had learned, somewhere along the way, that some things were just honestly uncertain, and that was a sufficient answer. The door closed behind him. Ava sat at the kitchen table in the apartment that wasn't hers, with the coffee that was, and thought about the next 7 years. The board's formal offer arrived on a Monday, 3 weeks after the story ran. It came through Richard Cho's office, 12 pages of legal language that boiled down to a single proposition. Whitmore Capital wanted Ava back. Full reinstatement of executive authority, full restoration of compensation and benefits, a written public acknowledgement from the remaining board members, the ones who hadn't been named in the criminal proceedings, that the suspension had been unjust and that the company's actions on that night had been in error. They were offering her everything she'd had before, plus a restructured board with 3 new independent seats to be filled at her discretion. Richard called her when it arrived. She was in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Logan's apartment. She'd finally gotten the hotel 4 days ago, a modest place in Pilsen that was nicer than it looked from the outside, and where the woman at the front desk had recognized her name without making any particular event of it. She'd taken the room week to week because she still hadn't decided anything that required a longer commitment. 12 pages, Richard said, but the substance is straightforward. They want you back. I know what they want, she said. I want to be clear about what you'd be going back to. The criminal proceedings against Kessler, Paulson, and Foss are separate from the company's civil liability. The company itself is not charged with anything. What's left is a functioning business with a damaged reputation and a board that has, for obvious reasons, significant motivation to restore confidence in the leadership. I know all of that too, Richard. So what are you thinking? She looked out the window of the coffee shop. Outside, it was a gray January afternoon. The last of the blizzard snow compressed into dirty ridges along the curbs. The sidewalks wet and salt-stained. A woman was walking a dog that was clearly unhappy about the temperature. A delivery driver was arguing with a parking meter in the specific one-sided way people argued with parking meters. I'm thinking I need a few more days, she said. You have time. They're not going anywhere. She sat with the phone for a moment after the call ended. The coffee cup in front of her was half full and had gone cold while she was talking. She didn't drink it. She looked at the street. She'd spent 4 weeks now thinking about what Logan had said at the kitchen table, what the next 7 years could look like instead of what the last 7 years had to mean. She'd been rolling it around in the particular way you rolled something around when you already knew the answer but weren't ready to say it out loud. She picked up the phone and called Logan. The offer came, she said when he answered. I figured. He was in what sounded like his kitchen, a background of quiet domestic noise, something on the stove. What does it look like? Full reinstatement, new board seats, public acknowledgement. She paused. Everything I would have wanted the morning after it happened. But not what you want now. It wasn't a question. She'd noticed he did that. Waited until he was certain enough to just state the thing directly, rather than asking it as a question. It was occasionally annoying and almost always accurate. No, she said, not what I want now. Then you know what you're going to do. Knowing and doing are different. Usually, he said. What's the gap? She thought about it. Actually thought about it, the way you had to when Logan asked something, because he would notice if you gave him a surface answer. I built that company for 7 years, she said. Walking away from it feels like admitting that what they did changed me. It did change you. I know, but not in the way they intended, he said. There's a difference. She heard something shift. A spoon against a pot, maybe. They wanted the change to take you down. It didn't. That's not the same as the change not happening. She was quiet for a moment. Miles has a baseball thing Saturday, Logan said, which was a non sequitur only on the surface. He's been working on his fielding. He wants someone to see it. Logan. I'm just mentioning it. Are you inviting me to a youth baseball game as a way of not telling me what to do about a major professional decision? I'm inviting you to a youth baseball game because Miles wants you there, he said. The professional decision is yours. I have no notes. She looked at the window again. The dog-walking woman had turned around and was now moving faster back in the direction she'd come from, the dog considerably happier about this direction. The delivery driver had given up on the meter and was pulling boxes from the back of his van with the energy of someone who had resolved their frustration into pure productivity. Saturday, she said. 10 o'clock. Don't wear anything you'd mind getting dirty. He's been working on sliding. But she turned down the offer on a Wednesday. She wrote the letter herself, didn't have Richard draft it, which surprised him when she told him, because it needed to be in her own words and not in the careful passive constructions of legal correspondence. She thanked the board for the offer. She acknowledged that the reinstatement proposal was genuinely fair under the circumstances and reflected a good faith effort to repair what had been broken. And then she said no. She said she was starting something new. She didn't have all the details yet when she sent the letter. She had a concept, a rough structure, and a conversation she'd been having with herself for 3 weeks that had clarified into something she could explain in one sentence. A consulting firm that helped companies identify fraud, systemic financial manipulation, and institutional corruption from the inside. Not as forensic accountants after the damage was done, but as embedded advisors who worked with leadership before the patterns became catastrophic. She'd seen what those patterns looked like now from both sides. She knew how they were hidden and where they left traces. She knew how integration processes became mechanisms for access abuse, how approval chains could be manipulated if the metadata was never examined, how shell positions in investment portfolios could signal hostile intent years before any move was made. She also knew now that the most dangerous thing wasn't the fraud itself. It was the distance between the people at the top and the infrastructure keeping everything running, the gap in which things happened without anyone noticing because the people who would have noticed were not the people anyone thought to ask. She needed someone who understood that gap from the inside. She called Logan on Thursday morning. He was at home between shifts. She'd learned his schedule over the past weeks well enough to know when to call. She heard Miles in the background, which meant it was after 3:30. I turned them down, she said. Okay, he said, not surprised. I'm starting something new. She'd thought about how to phrase this, whether to build up to it or just say it. She said it. I want you to be part of it. A pause, longer than his usual pauses. Explain what you mean by that, he said carefully. I'm building a consulting firm. Fraud identification, systemic risk detection, corruption pattern analysis. Companies hire us before they're in crisis, not after. We go in, we look at the infrastructure, we find the things that haven't broken yet, but will. She paused. You spent 6 years in M&A analyzing exactly the kinds of structural vulnerabilities that people like Kessler and Foss exploited. You identified the Archer Group problem before it collapsed, and you did it with partial information and a supervisor who told you to stop looking. I need someone who knows how to look. Silence. Logan, I'm here. I'm thinking. Take your time. She heard him move. The sound of a chair or a door. Some shift toward a quieter part of the apartment. When he came back, his voice was slightly lower, which meant Miles was nearby and he didn't want to have this conversation in front of him yet. What does it look like practically? He said. For now, it looks like the two of us and a small team we build as we grow. I have enough capitals coming back online to fund the first 18 months without external investment. I'm not interested in taking VC money. I've had enough experience with what that money can want in return. A pause. The salary would be real. Not what you'd have made at Archer Group at your peak, but close, and with equity that grows as the firm does. I have a kid, he said. I know. And a school schedule and a pickup time and a set of... Logan? She kept her voice steady. I'm not asking you to give any of that up. The work can be structured around it. I'm not interested in building something that works the way Whitmore Capital worked. The 70-hour weeks and the constant travel and the thing that ate everything else. She paused. I watched what that cost me. I'd like to not repeat it. Another silence. This one felt different, less processing, more something settling. Miles, Logan called. Not loudly. A moment. What? Miles from somewhere else in the apartment. Come here a second. The sound of small feet. A pause that suggested Miles had appeared in whatever doorway Logan was standing near. You remember Ava? Logan said. A beat. Yes, Miles said with the slight inflection of someone who found the question unnecessary. She might be coming to work with me, like we'd work together on the same things. A pause. She could picture Miles's face, the considering look, the level assessment. Okay, Miles said. That's it? Okay? She's good at explaining things, Miles said, as though this settled the professional question definitively. The sound of his feet going back to wherever he'd come from. Logan came back to the phone. She could hear him almost laughing, the specific sound of someone trying not to. High praise, she said. Highest he gives, Logan said, and then, after a moment, I'm in. She exhaled slowly. Okay. I'm going to need a couple of weeks. I have to give notice, and I have to make sure the transition doesn't leave the building management in a bad spot. Marcus has been good to me. Take whatever time you need. And I want the salary conversation to be a real conversation. Numbers on a table, not you deciding what's fair for me. Agreed. And I want to understand the equity structure before I sign anything. I would expect nothing less from a former M&A analyst. Good. A pause. What are we calling it? She'd thought about this. She had a few options, none of which she'd fully committed to. I was thinking ground line, she said, like a foundation, the thing you build everything else on. Quiet for a moment. That works, he said. Ma'am. Gerald Foss entered a not guilty plea in February and hired 3 additional law firms by March, which was the kind of move that signaled both resources and anxiety. Martin Kessler's legal team filed for a change of venue and was denied. Derek Paulson, facing the most direct evidentiary exposure of the 3, his device ID, appeared in 11 of the 31 fraudulent approvals with no explanation that held up to scrutiny, began cooperating with federal prosecutors in late January, which was the development that Richard Cho called her about with barely suppressed satisfaction in his voice. Paulson is talking, he said. How much is he saying? Enough. The prosecutors have told my contact that his cooperation substantially expands the scope of the charges. Foss's name is in more places than just the Northbridge investment. He paused. There's apparently a communications trail. Emails, encrypted messages. Paulson had copies. Of course he did, Ava said. He was smart enough to keep insurance. Whether that makes him smart or just afraid of the people he was working with is a philosophical question. Not one I'm particularly interested in right now. No, I imagine not. Richard cleared his throat. The civil case against the board is straightforward at this point. I expect a settlement offer before summer. You're not going to have to go through a trial for that piece. And the criminal cases? Those move at the pace of federal criminal cases, which is to say slowly and then all at once. Kessler's trial date is set for fall. Foss will likely follow. A pause. You may be called as a witness. I know. You're prepared for that? She thought about the conference room on the 43rd floor, the rehearsed hands, the 14 faces that wouldn't look at her. She thought about standing at the whiteboard in the ground floor conference room at 2 in the morning with a ballpoint pen and a building management printout, and how that night had been the most clearly she'd seen anything in years. Yes, she said. I'm prepared. Ground Line opened its doors, which was a loose description for leasing 2 rooms in a shared office space in the West Loop and buying a coffee maker and a whiteboard in late February. The first weeks were the grind that all beginnings were, no matter how many times you'd done it or how much you knew going in. Ava had done this before. The cold outreach, the credibility-building conversations, the pitching to organizations that needed to be convinced they had a problem before they could be convinced to pay someone to help solve it. She was better at it than she'd been at 24, which helped. She was also better known, which cut both ways. Some potential clients were drawn by her visibility. Others were cautious about bringing in someone whose name had been in the news in association with a federal investigation, regardless of the outcome. Logan was methodical about it in the way he was methodical about everything. He put together a framework for their initial assessment process, a structured audit of financial approval chains, access permission histories, and integration records that was clean and thorough and that he could explain in terms a non-technical executive could follow. He had a particular talent for that, taking something complicated and giving it to someone in the size and shape they could actually hold. You've done this before, Ava said, the first time she watched him walk a prospective client through the framework in a meeting. The client was a mid-sized logistics company whose CFO had recently resigned under vague circumstances and whose new board was appropriately nervous. Logan had explained the access audit process in about 8 minutes, answered 3 questions without consulting any notes, and left the room with a signed engagement letter. I used to explain M&A risk assessments to clients who didn't understand M&A, he said. Same skill, different content. You make it look easy. It's not easy. I just don't show the part that isn't. He looked at her. Neither do you, for what it's worth. She thought about the conference room on the 43rd floor, the effort it had taken to keep her voice level while they told her everything she'd built was gone. I've had practice. That's what I mean. They were good together in the way that people were good together when they came at the same problems from different angles, and neither of them needed the other one to be wrong in order to feel right. She thought in structures and growth patterns and the large-scale architecture of how organizations moved. He thought in sequences and access patterns and the small granular details that accumulated into systems. Between them, they covered the terrain. It wasn't perfect. Logan was sometimes too slow to commit to a course of action when speed mattered. He second-guessed decisions in the revision stage when the decision was already made and what was needed was execution. Ava moved too fast sometimes and had to be pulled back before she'd outpaced the evidence. They had a sharp argument in week 3 about how to handle a client who wanted to scope down the engagement in ways that would have made the findings meaningless. And the argument lasted 2 days and resolved only when they separately arrived at the same answer and neither of them wanted to be the one to admit the other had been partially right. Janet pointed this out to both of them when she heard about it, with the directness she applied to everything. You're both stubborn, she said. You're just stubborn in different directions, which is either going to be very good or a total disaster. Thank you, Janet, Logan said. I'm not finished. She looked at Ava. You're used to being the smartest person in the room. That's not... And you, she looked at Logan, are used to being the person the smartest person in the room doesn't notice. Neither of them had an answer for that one. Figure out how to be 2 people who are both smart and both noticed, Janet said. The rest will work itself out. She went back to whatever she'd been doing, which had the effect of the conversation being over. Ava looked at Logan. Logan looked at Ava. She's not wrong, he said. She's almost never wrong, Ava said. It's annoying. The thing that nobody talked about, The thing that didn't fit neatly into the story that had been written about her in the months since the Tribune piece ran was how long it took for the ground to feel solid again. People assumed when they looked at the outcome from the outside that it was clean, that the truth had come out, that the people responsible were being held accountable, that the company had been restored and the CEO had made a triumphant pivot into something new. The narrative had a shape that human beings liked: injustice, followed by revelation, followed by resolution, and from the outside it probably looked like that shape was what she was living inside. What she was actually living inside was messier and quieter and had no clear ending point. She woke up some mornings still with the specific weight of that conference room on her chest, the 14 faces, the rehearsed fold of Martin's hands, the way Derek had looked out the window, bored, while they told her everything she'd worked for was suspended. She would lie in the hotel room. And then, in March, the apartment she finally rented in Pilsen, 4 blocks from Logan's building, which had happened partly because she liked the neighborhood, and partly because she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that the neighborhood was where her life had relocated, and she would feel it all over again. Not always. Not every day. But enough. She didn't talk about it much. She talked to her attorney about the case, she talked to Logan about the work, she talked to Janet about the neighborhood, and occasionally about things that didn't fit neatly into either category. She called her sister in Phoenix more than she had in years. Her sister, to her credit, had stopped waiting for the moment to be less complicated, and had simply started showing up in the way sisters showed up, with opinions about things that weren't any of her business, and a particular laugh that Ava had not realized, until she started hearing it regularly again, that she had missed. She went to Miles's baseball game on the Saturday Logan had mentioned, and the one 3 weeks after that, and the one after that, which was rained out after 2 innings and dissolved into a collective retreat to a diner 4 blocks away where 6 8-year-olds ate pancakes with the focused energy of people who had been cheated out of something and were going to extract compensation in carbohydrates. She sat across from Logan in a corner booth while Miles debated the ranking of baseball players with the boy from third base with the absolute certainty of someone for whom this question had a correct answer. "You're smiling," Logan said. "I'm watching a child argue about baseball statistics at a pancake diner," Ava said. "It's hard not to. He does this at home too. I'll just be in the kitchen and suddenly there's a very detailed argument coming from the other room and I'll realize he's arguing with himself. He's going to be a lawyer." "He's going to be something," Logan said. "I don't know what yet." She looked at him across the table. This was one of the things she'd learned about Logan over months of proximity. The look on his face when he talked about Miles was the most unguarded version of him there was. He was measured about most things, careful and considered, and somewhat armored in the way people became armored when they'd carried difficult things alone for a long time. But Miles got through all of it without trying. Miles just got through. "You're a good father," she said. He looked at her, not deflecting, not diminishing, just taking it. "I'm a functional father," he said. "On the good days." That's what good looks like from the inside. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner windows, the rain was coming down in sheets, running in channels along the curb. The baseball diamond they'd left 30 minutes ago, presumably now a small lake. "Diane would have found all of this completely insane," he said. "The baseball? Or the—" She gestured generally. "All of it. The blizzard, the whiteboard, the consulting firm." He looked at the table. She had a very specific tolerance for dramatic situations, which was low. She was a very practical person. "You're a practical person." "I am, but I came by it the long way." He looked up. "She would have liked you, I think. She liked people who said the true thing even when it was inconvenient." Ava thought about that. "I don't always say the true thing. More than most. That's not a high bar." "No," he agreed. "But it's the bar most people are working with." Miles appeared at the side of the table, having concluded whatever the baseball argument had resolved into. He looked at Logan and then at Ava with the level assessment that was simply his natural resting expression. "Can I get hot chocolate?" "You already had pancakes," Logan said. "The rain made me cold." "That's—" Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. "Fine. 1. Miles went back to order with the efficiency of someone who had known the answer was yes and had just needed to go through the motion of asking. Ava watched him go. He's going to be fine, she said. It came out simply, not as reassurance, but as an observation. I know, Logan said. I just have to keep not screwing it up long enough for that to happen. You're not screwing it up. Not today. He picked up his coffee. Ask me again tomorrow. She smiled at that. It was the kind of humor she'd come to recognize in him, the dry, understated kind that came from someone who had learned to find the small absurdities in hard things, not because the hard things were funny, but because the alternative was to let them be only hard. In April, Nathan Reyes testified before a federal grand jury. His testimony, combined with the email documentation he'd preserved and Paulson's cooperation agreement, gave prosecutors a timeline of the conspiracy that stretched back 5.5 years, beginning with Northbridge Capital's initial strategic investment in Meridian and running forward through the acquisition, the access manipulation, and the coordinated short positions that had paid out in the hours after the board's midnight statement. Gerald Foss's not guilty plea became a guilty plea on a Tuesday in late April. His attorney released a statement describing his client's decision as reflecting a commitment to accepting responsibility. Ava read the statement on her phone at her desk in the West Loop office and thought, no. What it reflects is a very good lawyer telling a very rich man that the evidence is too comprehensive to survive a trial. Martin Kessler's trial began in October and lasted 11 days. She testified on day 4. She sat in the witness box in a federal courtroom and told the truth, in the particular, careful way you told the truth in that setting, responsive to the questions, no editorializing, no performance. Kessler's defense attorney tried twice to establish that the access log evidence was ambiguous, and twice the evidence itself made that argument difficult to sustain. She saw Martin's face once during her testimony, when she was looking at the opposing counsel table and he happened to be looking at the same time. She didn't look away. Neither did he. It lasted about 3 seconds and told her nothing she hadn't already known. He was convicted on 7 of 9 counts, sentenced in December. She didn't attend the sentencing. Richard offered to go on her behalf, but she told him there was no need for representation and that she had work to do and that the sentencing wasn't a thing she needed to witness personally to understand that it had happened. Logan, when she told him that, said, "Good." "Good? You don't owe that proceeding your time," he said. "You gave them the evidence, you testified, you did your part. The rest is just the legal system doing what it does." Some people would say closure. Closure is something you build, Logan said, not something that gets handed to you when someone else gets sentenced. She thought about that for a long time after. What? The thing about rebuilding something from the inside out, not a company this time, but a life, and the distinction mattered, was that there was no external metric for when you'd succeeded. With a company, you had revenue and growth rate and market position. There were numbers. The numbers told you where you were. There were no numbers for this. There was Miles asking, on a Tuesday morning in November, if she was coming to his school's thing on Friday, the thing being a Thanksgiving presentation for parents and family, and Logan saying, "You don't have to," and Miles saying, with some impatience, "I know she doesn't have to. I'm asking if she wants to." And her realizing, in the particular way you realize things when they'd already been true for a while before you acknowledged them, that she wanted to. There was Janet making coffee on Saturday mornings when Ava came over to go over the week's project notes with Logan, and the coffee being ready before she knocked because Janet had heard her on the stairs, and not making any comment about this because the comment was unnecessary. There was the conversation she had with her sister in Phoenix in late November, her sister having flown up for a weekend visit, the two of them walking along the lakefront in coats that were not adequate for the temperature. Her sister said, "You seem different." And Ava said, "I am different." And her sister said, "Different how?" And Ava stood there for a moment and looked at the lake, gray and choppy in November, nothing like the lakefront postcards, just actual water in actual winter, and said, "I know what I want now, not what I'm supposed to want, what I actually want." Her sister looked at her for a moment and then said, "That took you long enough," which was the sisterly version of "I'm glad." There was a day in December when Groundline closed its third client engagement, a pharmaceutical distribution company whose CFO had found, using their audit framework, a 15-year pattern of vendor account manipulation that had been invisible precisely because it had been so slow and consistent. and Logan came into her office with 2 cups of coffee and set one on her desk and said, "Third one," and she said, "Third one," and neither of them needed to say anything else about what that meant. There was a Saturday in the following spring, in a neighborhood park 4 blocks from the apartment that had stopped feeling temporary sometime around January, when Miles was running bases with 2 other kids from his class, while Logan sat on a bench doing something on his phone that was probably work-related, and Ava was sitting beside him not doing anything in particular, just sitting in the sun on the first genuinely warm day the city had produced since October. She was not thinking about Whitmore Capital, or the trial, or the settlement, which had arrived in March and resolved cleanly. She was not thinking about the conference room or the frozen accounts or the blizzard that had buried the city in 4 inches of snow on the worst night of her professional life. She was watching a 9-year-old run bases in a park and thinking about nothing in particular, which was something she had not known how to do until very recently, for years. "Hey," Logan said, without looking up from his phone. "Yeah?" "Miles is going to ask if you can come to his game on Thursday. He's been working up to it all morning." She looked at Miles, who was currently arguing with the other kids about some procedural matter involving a base tag, and was very much not looking in her direction. "How do you know?" "He asked me last night if I thought you'd want to. I told him I didn't know. He'd have to ask you himself." A pause. "He's been practicing the asking. I can tell by the way he keeps not doing it." She looked at Miles again. 9 years old, gap-toothed, and serious, and entirely his father's son in the way he approached things. The preparation, the considered timing, the preference for certainty before commitment. "He doesn't have to practice asking me things," she said. "I know." Logan glanced up briefly. "He just wants to get it right." She understood that. She understood it specifically, the wanting to get it right. The way it could make the asking harder than it needed to be, how you could spend so long preparing for a thing that you almost talked yourself out of it. She'd done that more times than she wanted to count with more important things than a baseball game invitation. Miles finished the dispute about the base tag, apparently in his favor, and turned and walked back toward the bench. He walked with his hands in his pockets, unhurried, which was a very specific kind of purposeful casual that she recognized from his father. He stopped a few feet away. "Ava," he said. "Yeah?" "There's a game Thursday, if you wanted to come." He looked at her directly, which he always did. It was one of the things about him she'd come to rely on. The directness. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. He considered this for a moment, as if verifying that the answer was what it appeared to be. Then he nodded, satisfied, and turned and went back to the game. Logan was looking at his phone again, but she could see the corner of his mouth. "You knew I'd say yes," she said. "I thought it was likely." "That's not the same as knowing." "No," he agreed, "but with you it's usually close enough." She looked at the park, the other kids chasing each other between bases, the trees starting to green at the edges, the particular quality of April light that Chicago produced after a long winter, flat and bright and slightly disbelieving of itself. People walked dogs. A man on a bicycle nearly ran over a squirrel and overcorrected dramatically. Somewhere in the middle distance, someone was playing music through a speaker, something she didn't recognize, drifting in and out on the light wind. She thought about what it meant to lose everything and find out it was the wrong everything. She thought about the version of herself who had walked out of a 43rd floor office carrying a green coffee mug and a photograph of her mother and thought she was leaving with nothing. She had been wrong about that. She'd been wrong about a lot of things. And she was still wrong about things. And she was going to keep being wrong about things because that was just what happened when you were a person moving through time, making decisions with incomplete information. The difference was that she knew it now in a way she hadn't known it before, not as an abstract acknowledgement, but as a felt truth, the kind you carried in your body. What she had come through, the blizzard, the wet marble, the whiteboard in the ground floor conference room, the hard months of building something new in the ruins of something she hadn't finished grieving, had not made her a better person in the clean, simple way that stories sometimes suggested. She was still impatient, still moved too fast sometimes, still had to be reminded occasionally that her certainty about something was not the same thing as that something being certain. But she knew the difference now between a life built around what impressed people and a life built around what mattered. And she knew, now, that the most important things she had were not things she had built or achieved or acquired. They were things she had stumbled into on a night when she had nothing left to protect. A man who asked if she was guilty and listened when she said no. A boy who trusted her with his math homework. A neighbor who made coffee before you knocked. These were not the kinds of assets that showed up on a balance sheet. They had no market value that she could measure. She could not have listed them in a board presentation or justified them to an investor. They were, she understood now, the only things worth building a life around. She reached over and picked up the coffee cup that Logan had set on the bench between them when he sat down. Her cup, from the cafe on the corner, where the woman at the counter had started making it without being asked when she saw Ava come in, because she'd come in enough mornings that she was now simply a person who came in on mornings and drank her coffee a certain way. She sat in the April sun in a park, in a neighborhood that was hers now, in a way she hadn't let herself have a neighborhood in years, and she watched a 9-year-old run bases. It wasn't a perfect life. It had rough edges and open questions, and a legal calendar that still had 2 more proceedings on it before everything was truly settled. It had arguments about client scope, and mornings where the work felt impossible, and the particular loneliness that came and went no matter how much good was also present. But it was hers in the way things were yours when you'd chosen them from the inside rather than built them for the outside. And that, she had learned, slowly, inconveniently, and in a blizzard, was not a small thing. It was in fact the whole thing. It always had been.